Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Today's episode is about exploring the magical world of mushrooms with Giuliana Furci. Giuliana is a foundress and executive director of the Fungi Foundation. She's a Harvard University associate, Dame of the Order of the Star of Italy, co-chair of the IUCN Fungal Conservation Committee, and author of several titles, including a series of field guides to Chilean fungi. And she's also worked in the nonprofit sector for the last 17 years and has held consulting positions in U.S. philanthropic foundations, as well as full-time positions in international marine conservation NGOs and Chilean environmental NGOs. So I am so excited to welcome Giuliana to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
So, Giuliana, I want to talk a little bit about your childhood and how your formative years really brought you to this world of fungi. And I know it's a very long journey, but if you could just set it up for our audience before we dive into the world of fungi, I think it would really help with the context. So, how did your path from childhood to undergrad to adulthood bring you to this world?
Well, I was born and brought up in London, daughter of a Chilean refugee and an Italian student. And I lived in London until I was 15 years old, almost 15. And during that time period, I was, immersed in a concrete jungle, as Bob would say, and with periodic travel to the Italian countryside or to Chile. But it was really an imbalanced, nature versus concrete situation. But my mother always kept our house full of plants, and she would always strive for environmental matters. And I think she was very, very important in me taking a path towards environmental conservation, as well as my Italian grandmother, who was she worked, in the countryside, and she was working with land constantly with my granddad. So it was a pretty unbalanced way of getting there, I would say.
And what about for your undergrad? What did you study in undergrad, and how did that sort of set the stage for moving into the world of fungi?
So when I finished my schooling years, all I knew was that I wanted to give back in some way. I thought it was giving back through humanity. So I studied to be a social worker, and that definitely wasn't a great choice because there were many humans involved. And then I thought, well, I'm going to try working for plants, but what about plants, in the water? And I started studying with a phycologist, so studying seaweed, algae. And while I was at university doing my undergraduate studies in aquaculture, I was introduced to fungi by an encounter I had in the forest that was not deliberate at all. I was studying to protect seaweed and ended up protecting fungi many years later.
Amazing. And actually, I think this is a fun kind of little aside to ask, like, how is it actually pronounced? Is it fungi or fungi?
So you can say it either way. You can say fungi, fungi, fungi. In the US, people normally say fungi. And in the UK, it's normally fungi. But they're all correct.
Ah, okay. There's a joke that is about mushrooms. It's what does the mushroom say when he goes to the party? And then the answer is, I'm a fun guy. So,
Yeah.
so
And
that's
then the lichen says, I'm liking it.
It's so funny. I had a argument with my fiance about how it's pronounced, and so I've been calling it fun guy, but I normally call it fungi. So I think it's so funny because a lot of people really don't know. So thank you for that. And also, is mushrooms interchangeable with the word fungi?
No, so mushrooms are a type of fungi or fungi. Fungi are a kingdom of organisms where you have yeasts, molds, lichens, conchs. And so mushrooms are like saying birds versus animals that would be fungi.
And your work is specifically on all types of fungi or in particular mushrooms?
I work to bring justice to all of the organisms of kingdom fungi as much as possible, but my field work is normally focused on mushrooms and other types of macroscopic fungi. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And can you walk us through the journey of mushrooms and the dominant types of mushrooms? I know in the last couple years, it feels like there's been an explosion of interest in mushrooms. And so I'm just curious if you could tell us, like, what are sort of the dominant types that are found in most environments, or is it just really unique to the geography of a place?
So fungi are specific to their substrate. And so you won't find a mushroom growing on birch that normally grows on pine, for example. So they are very very specific and normally don't share many hosts between each other.
Ah, got it. Okay. And why are they so important to our ecosystem? I mean, why is there why did you dedicate your life's work to studying them?
Hmm. So fungi, as I mentioned before, are organisms that conform a kingdom or queendom, as I like to say as well, of their own, just like plants do and just like animals do. So when we say fungi, we're saying plants, right? The equivalent. And in plants, there are moss, ferns, trees, shrubs, and many other types of organisms. If we say kingdom animalia, the animals will find, insects, birds, mammals, and so many other types of organisms. And when we talk about the fungi, we're talking about a huge group of organisms that have different ecological roles, but they mostly are either symbiotic, which means that they associate with other organisms to enable life, or they are decomposers, which means they they ensure the recycling of organic matter on Earth. We know that energy is not lost; it is transformed, and it's the fungi that do that with the bacteria mostly.
Mm, wow. And why why have mushrooms not been studied for so long? Do you have a hypothesis on that? Is it because of the nature of kind of the I guess the recycling piece of it that they kind of recycle substances, or why is there such a renewed interest today in mushrooms? And I think the work of Paul Stamets has also been helpful, and there's been documentaries that have come out. But yeah, I'm just curious, like, why do you think they've been so understudied? If they've been so important, if you have a hypothesis on that.
So, I mean, the organisms have not been acknowledged as a kingdom of their own, all the fungi, until 1969, which is when we had the tools and techniques to really see different cell structures, to be able to measure different things, to see, microscopic characteristics and differences. Um, so the reason that the organisms are understudied is because we haven't really had the tools to study them in a better way. That on one hand, and on the other hand, these are organisms that are associated either to paganism or to rot, to decay, or to phallic structures, to foul smells, to textures that are weird, but basically to decomposition, which to many is thought to be death. and not, part of life. So for many of those reasons, they have been understudied. And what's have been happening recently is that we've had, we've had the opportunity to discover more. And we've had some great opportunities through movies or books to be able to spread the word of fungi. So, in the case of Paul Stamets, for example, I first met him, almost 20 years ago when I went to study with him. And he's, for many decades, for 40 years, he's been struggling for mainstream recognition of the attributes of fungi. And finally, after that, all that time, we're starting to get somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think the way that I've seen the range of descriptions of mushrooms is, they can be toxic and lethal to medicinal, and then to hallucinogenic. And I'm so curious, like, how does one kind of, I don't know if you want to call it species, but how do mushrooms have such a wide range in being able to kind of heal, but also kill? I mean, it seems so fascinating that that's the case. And I think a lot of people really are clueless to what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like with plants and animals. There's no difference. I mean, there are animals that kill, that poison you, that feed you. There are plants that kill you, that feed you. So what's curious is that one doesn't expect that from the fungi, being that they're another kingdom of life. So it's important to understand that, for example, within kingdom of the fungi, there are all sorts of organisms, from yeast that make our bread, our chocolate, our wine, our beer, our soy sauce, and so many other things, our coffee, to mushrooms that we might eat or might not, but also to the lichens that we might use to dye wool or other fibers. But that whole array of species and their uses are not different for fungi than they are a huge array for plants and animals.
Ah, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's so interesting because in my mind, I sort of separate mushrooms in their own kind of space and category. And of course, yeah, fungi includes yeast, and you said mold as well.
Yes, mold. So yeasts, molds, lichens, conchs, and there are many microscopic organisms in aquatic ecosystems, marine and freshwater. I mean, they're a whole kingdom of life, just like animals and just like plants. So, for example, a morel and a button mushroom are as closely related as a flea and an elephant.
Wow, it's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
And what about when it comes to kind of classifying mushrooms by age or gender? I mean, is it easy or difficult to tell how old mushrooms are, or does it just require a lot of experience?
So the thing with age, so this is the thing. So if we were to determine the age of an ant or of an elephant, that that's the equivalent of the question. So when you're asked about anything about fungi or mushrooms, or it's impossible because they're not one thing. They're not one species or even one group, taxonomic group. So how do we determine the age? How can we determine the age of an insect? That's the equivalent of the question of how can we determine the age of a mushroom,
Hmm.
right? So there's a big opening of the mind that needs to happen when talking about them. So we can we can determine the age of a species depending on what type of species it is of fungus, just as if it were a type of animal. But with mushrooms, the ones that form these structures that have, a stipe and a cap and a pileus, like an umbrella, for example, right? A common mushroom. What we're seeing with that macroscopic structure is basically the equivalent of a fruit of a tree. So um, the tree we don't see on the surface, and that's the mycelium, right? This body, this ever living or ever growing, in many cases, body that lives in the soil, in a tree trunk, sometimes in, bodies or inside, invisible to the naked eye, that lives all year round. And then once a year or twice a year, or once every few years, it will produce this macroscopic spore-producing body that's a mushroom or a conch. And so we know that there are some mycelia, some of these big structures that are one individual that can live for thousands of years. But and there are others that might live for a very short period of time. Um, we can't easily determine that um, in a generic way, but we do know that a mycelium that lives, for example, on a piece of wood will probably live as long as there's enough wood to live on, right? So once that wood is fully decomposed, the fungus will that body of the fungus will probably no longer continue to be able to live. Yeah, and then with gender, it's a whole other issue. There's no male or female in fungi. There's a species of fungus that has dozens of thousands of mating types, for example.
Got it. And can you define mycelium for our audience who may be new to that word, and how that's different from the word of mushroom and fungi?
A mycelium is a structure made up of microscopic filaments called hyphae that interconnect to create a sort of web-like white, mostly white, fluffy uh, material that you will find in the soil. Now, that's the body of the fungus, of some fungi, of mushroom producing fungi. So, yeasts and lichens don't produce that body called a mycelium, but the mushrooms that we see in the forest all of them do. So, from a mycelium, once or twice a year, or once every few years, this structure that we harvest to eat or photograph will be produced with the only purpose of producing and dispersing spores, which are sort of the equivalent of seeds for sexual reproduction of the fungi.
Got it. So if you were to call someone a mycologist, it would be the person who studies mycelium, which is largely focused on mushrooms. And this kind of
So
okay, go ahead.
no,
I'm new to this space, so
no, it's fine. So a mycologist is a scientist who studies organisms of kingdom of the fungi. Now, a mycologist might be focused on yeasts, which are unicellular fungi that reproduce in a totally different way, that have no mycelium and that have no mushrooms.
got it.
A mycologist might be a mycologist lichenologist and studies, these organisms that are symbiotic organisms with algae. A mycologist may well be somebody who studies molds, for example, or a mycologist can also study aquatic microscopic organisms that are from kingdom of the fungi. Now, the people who study only mushroom-forming fungi normally are mycologists who study the order Agaricales. So that's how you would name only mushroom-studying mycologists. They study Agaricales.
Got it. Okay. Wow. There's a lot of definitions.
I mean, it's not that difficult, Yasmin, if you think about it. You wouldn't call an ornithologist a zoologist, and you wouldn't
Right.
call an entomologist just a zoologist, right?
Right.
So a botanist, a zoologist, and a mycologist. Those are the big categories. A
Got it.
botanist studies plants, right?
Mm-hmm.
A zoologist studies animals, and a mycologist studies fungi. But inside a botanist, there are several different types of scientists studying different organisms.
Thank you for that. Now I'm learning a lot from this show. So thank you. And I'm sure a lot of people have the same question because I think for folks who are not studying it. So thank you for setting that up, and it makes sense now. So now I know what mycologist means. And I'm also curious, Juliana, why you decided to study in Chile and not go back to the UK, and also like what sort of discoveries you found in your own work.
So when I started working for the fungi, I was, in a country where there was nowhere to study mycology. There were no mycologists, available to help me further that curiosity. And so I could have left and, studied in a different country. But I also had the choice, I had the opportunity, well, the possibility to take the opportunity to make sure that nobody else had to leave their country again to study mycology. And that was the route I chose to take. And it was to sort of, not pursue the ambition of knowing more about fungi in an academic sense, but more of pursuing, the building of a platform to enable mycology for anybody and everybody wherever there isn't a chance to do that academically. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And do you expect to stay in Chile to kind of spearhead the Fungi Foundation, or are you planning to expand that into other parts of the world? Or is there maybe another place in the world that has more species, or um, other species of fungi that might be interesting for you and your team to study?
So the Fungi Foundation is based in the US and in Chile, and we for many years we've been working all over the world. I've been um, doing field studies in close to 20 countries already. In my career, and many people at the foundation travel to different countries in the world to help with surveys and studies. So our work has never really been restricted to one geography, and it will continue to grow, and it will continue to deepen knowledge and deepen the building of opportunities for mycology, in different countries of the world. Our organization is a global one, and when the moment is ripe, I'm sure that other country offices might also be created.
And what can folks in our audience, we have a pretty global audience, about 70 countries. What
Mhm.
can people do today to kind of take action and support your foundation and your work?
So there are different ways to support the foundation, and thank you for asking. Um, One of the ways is probably the most direct way, and a way that many people like to contribute, and that's by making a donation on the web page. But that's not really the only way we feel somebody can contribute. You can contribute in a very effective way by incorporating fungi into your language, and to really stop referring to life on earth as just plants and animals, and to acknowledge the fact that they live, to learn who they are and what they do, and to transmit that to other people. So next time, you're having dinner with friends, and you're having a lovely glass of wine, or maybe you're having a fruit juice or a glass of kombucha, and you're looking at a beautiful bread basket, with the most amazing crumb, and you're wondering whether you're going to, eat it with butter or oil, and then you have, some wonderful food. Really, none of what I described can live without fungi. I
Hmm.
mean, that's the thank you one needs to give at the table too. So just acknowledging and sharing that is a huge contribution to our mission.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to think about that, how fungi is in a lot of our, food and what we consume day in and day out, but we sort of don't think about it that way at all.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to double click on, which I'm not sure if this is something you've studied, but mushrooms have become very popular for their hallucinogenic properties, and specifically psilocybin. I actually went to a talk with Michael Pollan many years ago when I lived in San Francisco. And, that's sort of been an explosion of interest in magic mushrooms. And so I'm curious, what has been your experience? Why have some mushrooms become hallucinogenic?
Well, we use the term psychedelic and not hallucinogenic. Hallucinogenic really it refers to a feature that may or may not occur, and it's but psychedelic is the term that we use for the quote unquote mind altering feature of these species. So the psychedelic sort of awakening that we're seeing now is truly important, and I think it's in some way the result of the truly traumatic ways of living that we've normalized for many years, and so what we're seeing now is also a reversing on these very unfortunate policies that were passed, during the war on drugs. Nixon was really played an important part on stopping the medicinal use of these species that could promote mental health, well-being, or emotional well-being, because it's dangerous to promote peace and that well-being when you're trying to drive an agenda that is more conflict driven. But now that we have so many ailments after so many years of destructive behavior, of destructive and confrontational relationships, from between countries, between people, these species come to offer a way to heal trauma, a way to heal depression, and a way to promote, well-being and dignity at the end of life, and love and peace and gratitude.
I love that so much. So Giuliana, what have you seen change so drastically in the last decade or so since you started working in this space? Have you had any kind of surprising ahas or moments of maybe clarity, and especially how the last year and a half or so of the pandemic and how that sort of shifted your point of view?
Well, more than being able to sort of presence or to focus on my own personal sort of moments of clarity, what I've been really enjoying is to see the public's moments of clarity, especially the public's reaction to books like Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, and to the movie Fantastic Fungi. So Fantastic Fungi, which was debuted at the beginning of the pandemic, really, really changed people's minds. And saying that, also Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, also made an impact on how people are living and seeing. The people who read that, but the Netflix move to screen Fantastic Fungi has really broadened the impact of these sort of outreach pieces for fungi. And I am just delighted to be able to witness this in my lifetime. I mean, I've been working for the fungi for 23 years. Imagine people like Paul Stamets, who, have been working for the fungi for 40 years, to be able to see this happen. It's a true delight to finally see people understand and realize the importance of these organisms and how much understanding them can help you live a good life. Tolerating interconnectedness, tolerating decay, understanding that rot and death isn't the end. It's a transformation, and it's a beginning for others. So it's a true privilege to witness this moment.
Oh, I love that so much. And the idea of decay and death is something in our culture that we sort of shy away from. And I actually had Dr. BJ Miller on the show, who talks about dying well, and how when a lot of people, at least in the West, when we perceive decay and death as a failure, as opposed to it being like just a natural progression of life, and that, there's so much beauty in that sort of transition. But we sort of are living in a culture that is, I don't know, antagonistic towards decay. And so I think, to me, that's been just even from a symbolic perspective, the most powerful story of fungi and mushrooms, the idea of what happens after decay and decomposition takes place,
Yeah.
and what is created, right, as a result of that. So I just appreciate that aspect.
It's very important. It's very important. It depends on how you see things, where you stand in the cycle of life, where the beginning is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Giuliana, I have a little bit of a personal question because I had never heard this before. The Dame of the Order of the Star of Italy.
Oh,
What
dear.
does that even mean? Can you tell
Oh,
us? So, for those of us who don't know.
right. So, um, a few years back, I was condecorated by the Republic of Italy for my service to the country through my work for fungi. And I was named Dame of the Republic of Italy, but because I was born outside of Italy, I was born in London. I am a member of the Order of the Star, which is an order of knights and dames who are Italian citizens who have honored their country and their country's reputation and represented their country um, outside of Italy, and that were also born outside of Italy.
Ah,
So
got it.
yeah.
And what does that mean in terms of your title, right? Because I think Sir refers to, what is it? Is it knight?
Well, in I think it's different in England than in other places. In Italy, I could use um, a few letters after my name. I don't choose to do so. But I also have come to terms with the fact that it's something real and that I shouldn't be ashamed of it. And I am actually proud that my country decided to honor me with that. But I don't use it normally after my name or before my name, and I don't expect anybody to do that either. Yeah.
Amazing. And I want to also go back to your parents because I believe you mentioned that your mom was a Chilean, was it a refugee during the
Yeah.
time of the dictatorship? And then your father was from Italy. How did your parents' story kind of give you the perspective you needed to live the life that you want? I think this is something a lot of people don't talk about, this sort of what does it mean to be a first generation immigrant? And then also you went, kind of to live in Chile, right, at the age of 15. So what was
Yeah.
that experience like? I think that the hyphenated journey is so interesting and something that we don't talk about, but it really provides so much perspective that a lot of folks don't have, right? If they're just born in a country to parents who are from that country. So yeah, I'm curious, like, how did that shift your perspective on humanity and the way the world worked?
Well, I think we're both first. Um, what was the term you used? First time immigrants or first?
First
You said
generation?
first generation, right? So both my mother and I are first generation immigrants because she emigrated from Chile and arrived as an immigrant to England. I, however, was born in England of an Italian father, and I was made to leave, England when my mother returned to her country. But I, feel like an immigrant in Chile. I'm not from here, born here. My father is from somewhere else. So there's a situation where both the exile and then his or her children as returnees to their country live something similar. We're uprooted. She was uprooted when she was made to leave. I was uprooted when I was made to leave. And many people don't acknowledge that, right? They think that when a refugee goes back to their country, the children born outside are also going back. And we're not going back. I'm coming. I came to Chile. I didn't return to Chile. Now, if I were to go and live in England, I would be going back. So there's a big difference there. I mean, the generational impact of exile and being uprooted when democracy returns and people are allowed back to their countries, that uprooting and that turmoil in families continues, and it can continue for many generations. So that's one thing that I've learned, and it really does shape you. The other thing that really, for me, has been very clear since I was very small is that I have no right to stop my mother, and I have no right to stop my mother from coming back to her country after she was made to leave by a dictator. And so I never really have been dwelling on the fact that I came to Chile. I am very proud that I helped my mom come back to Chile. I didn't, if I had really, um, been hard and said to my mother, I don't want to leave England. There's no way I'm leaving. I'm staying. Then, I could have really made it hard for her and possibly even stopped her from ever coming back to her country, right? Because she would have to choose. Do I stay with my child or do I go back to my country? So I'm very proud that I was able to leave my existence to one side at that moment and really just assist her in coming back to Chile, and with the feeling that I could eventually go back to England if I wanted to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I could probably spend an entire conversation just on that point, because I think it's so fascinating, and also what it was like in terms of the welcome back, or if you felt that there's just kind of a little bit of a boundary between you and the rest of the folks in the country who grew up in that country.
I mean, it's very difficult. For me, it was a culture shock. I mean, I arrived to a country. I mean, coming from England, from London to Santiago is a massive culture shock. I mean, when you're a 15-year-old and you're, a year away from leaving home, possibly, because in England it's not abnormal for young people to leave their home when they're 16 or 17, and to come to a country where people leave home when they get married, and it's just very different culturally. That on one hand, the level of independence of young people in South America in general is a lot less than in many of these large European countries. And so they're very small societies that have very little immigrants. And I came from London, which is probably one of the cities with the most number of immigrants. So, just coming to Chile, and everybody looked the same and everybody dressed the same. I couldn't believe it. It was awful. There was no diversity. Today, thankfully, thanks to immigration, there are some people of different color in Chile, but that's only happened in the last 5 years.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. I love that story. So, Giuliana, I know that we're kind of coming towards the end of our conversation. I have a couple more questions to ask you, and I'm curious if we can turn our attention a little bit towards mushrooms again and talk about the Telluride Mushroom Festival. I had never,
Yay.
I'd never heard about that before, and I'm just so excited that that exists. Obviously, I know about the film festival in Telluride. I have a side kind of career in film and have had films at the festival circuit. But yeah, I'm just curious, like, what exactly is this mushroom festival?
So the Telluride Mushroom Festival is a wonderful gathering that happens once every year and has happened for the last 41 years. It was a festival founded by the Salzmans, so Manny Salzman and his wife, and Paul Stamets, Gary Linkoff, and Andy Whale. Sorry, Andy Whale, the doctor. And it was born as a space to talk about entheogenic fungi and psychedelics and also science. And for many years, it has been a place where you can go and learn about the science of psychedelics, the science of fungi at large. There have been some very important mycologists there every year that have nothing to do with psychedelics. And it's a place to celebrate fungi, to revere them, to dress up as them, to chant your love for them. And we're a big family at this point, people that go every year. And really it's a place where if you're absolutely crazy about mushrooms, you can share that with other people who are also really, really into them. I want
Amazing.
to learn more.
What are some of
Yeah.
your favorite costumes that you've seen? I'm just curious. Is there?
Oh, there are some great ones. So there's a really lovely mycologist called John Michelotti. He's from Catskill Fungi in upstate New York, and the year before last he was a corn smut, and that was incredible. And this year he was a puffball. I mean, he just has some of the best costumes in the last years. I've seen groups of people dress up as Enokis, in the supermarket with inside the bag. You see people dressed as Paul Stamets. You see people dressed as stinkhorns, or it's just they're all incredible. The parade is really an unmissable scene if you're in Colorado in August.
Amazing. And did you dress up?
I dress up every year, yeah, and I've won costume awards before too. So yeah, I've been a giant mushroom, and I've been so many things. Yeah, some things that happen in Telluride stay in Telluride. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to Google all the videos and pictures right after this conversation because that's so fascinating. I just remember growing up with the show, I think it was called Smurfs,
Yes.
which is all about these kind of, cartoon-like mushrooms. And I love them so much. But
Well, if you look at the Smurfs a bit closer, what you're actually seeing, it's about the fungus, the mushroom Amanita muscaria. Amanita muscaria is the only mushroom around that looks like that, red with white dots and large, and it's the oldest hallucinogen known to humans, to
hmm.
humankind, and it's known to be in the ritual. Vedic beverage soma and associated to be the god soma. And what's happening is that Gargamel, the priest, is using his cat Azrael to kidnap these Smurfs. Right? He walks around with a basket, Gargamel, and as they kidnap the Smurfs so that the Smurfs take him back to the village where he can harvest these mushrooms. That's why he has a basket. So if you read between the lines, basically Gargamel is a priest looking for magic mushrooms, using a cat to kidnap the little blue creatures he sees in them.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness, you just blew my mind.
There's
That
no
is
other way you
so,
could read that show.
oh my goodness, wild, wild, wild. Uh, so Juliana, wow. Um, Juliana, what are some books and resources that have inspired you on this path? I know that you named a few earlier. And by the way, the Sheldrakes, actually, the children went to the same summer camp as my fiance.
Oh,
So
wow.
I know about their work. Was it Merlin who wrote Entangled?
Merlin Sheldrake, who wrote Entangled Life, I think that's one of the best books I've ever read about fungi. I mean, if anybody wants to know about mushrooms and fungi, Entangled Life is a must read. Also, the books of Nicholas P. Money. That there's one called The Triumph of the Fungi that's wonderful, and there are so many others he's written. Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard that talks about the mycelium that connects trees below ground, and there are if you want something more applied, Mycelium Running by Paul Stamets is a great read too.
Great, great. And for folks who are brand new beginners, where would you tell them to start in terms of online resources? Would you tell them to go to your website, or is there kind of anything else that you could point them to, especially for folks who are very, very new to this space completely?
I would definitely point you to see Fantastic Fungi.
Okay.
It's available on Netflix, and it really is a delightful documentary, and you can learn a lot of the basics of fungi. If you want to learn, you can see small pieces around decay and other things on our website at ffungi.org, and on the YouTube channel. And in general, there are several resources available. I'd look for your nearest mushroom club, your nearest mycological club. If wherever you are, you can try to contact groups of mycophiles that are going out into the forest. The forest is the best place to learn.
Amazing. And Giuliana, what is your main call to action for our audience? What is your main takeaway that you want to tell people about your work, or just something to leave them with to sort of ruminate about?
I would definitely invite people to think about the importance of rot, the importance of decay, the importance of letting things rot, the importance of ultimately even celebrating decomposition, because it's the only way that we can have recomposition. There will be no regeneration without degeneration. And I would love it if people could think a bit about how important it is, for example, that a lemon rots, even because that fungus that's on your old lemon that is first white and then goes bluish, well, that's where penicillin comes from. So let's think about humanity without penicillin, for example.
So let things rot. That's the
Yeah,
takeaway, call to action.
yeah.
And and Giuliana, where can people find you? What is the website of the Fungi Foundation?
So the Fungi Foundation website is ffungi.org, and you can find me on Instagram at Julie Fungi and at Fungi Foundation. And if you want it in Spanish, you can go to at Fundación Fungi, and you'll find us there.
Amazing. And just to reiterate for our guests, it's 2FF for
Yes.
fungi, and then you can find it that way. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Giuliana, thank you so much for your time. I learned so much, and I have a lot to think about from this conversation. I feel like this is just the beginning of my journey, and I know for a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of interest and probably a lot of follow-ups from this conversation. So thank you so much for your work and your contribution to humanity in this world. I'm very impressed and inspired by you.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted and honored at the invitation. Thank you.
For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about the world of fungi and the importance of fungi on our planet today. You can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.